Welcome to the Tuesday Huddle, a brief reflection on Sunday's message at Walnut Hill Church in Lexington, Kentucky. Each week, we revisit the heart of the sermon and consider how God's Word meets us in the days ahead. Thanks for listening. Let's continue the conversation.
Well, hello there and happy Monday to you. Here we are on Walnut Hill. My name is Shawn Barkley and I am seated across the table from my colleague, Jessica. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Beautiful day in the bluegrass today.
Yes.
Post Mother's Day.
Yes.
It is May the 11th, my sister's birthday today.
Oh, well, happy birthday, Laura.
And so did you have a good Mother's Day?
We did. It was anytime I'm with Lily is always good.
Yeah.
So we had a good time.
Good deal. It was a wonderful day here at Walnut Hill Church.
It was.
And if you're listening to us wherever you are and you have not yet worshiped with us, I'd love to invite you to go back and worship on our church website or church Facebook page, and then rejoin this podcast because we are talking about 1 Corinthians 13. It is called the love chapter.
Yes. And I really do encourage people to go back and listen to the sermon. It's pretty quick, but I think it breaks down something we'll talk about later, which is the 4 different types of love in Greek. And so really go back to that and just hear that. I think you'll enjoy learning more about that.
That is helpful to have that kind of context because we do throw around the word love a lot. You know, like I said in my message yesterday, I love my wife. I love peanut butter.
And I was sitting right next to your wife when you said that by that way. Yeah, and she laughed. She was a good sport.
Okay. Well, yeah, she is the subject of a lot of my sermon illustrations. Bless her heart.
You know, I was sitting there thinking beside her, I wonder how she feels if she hears these ahead of time, if she knows some of these stories are coming.
Nope. No preview whatsoever. That's why we drive to church separately.
Oh my
The
goodness.
drive home gives her time to cool off a little bit.
That's almost like being a stand-up comedian and not knowing, being the wife of a stand-up comedian and just not knowing what's going to come out. It's almost, she must be nervous. Let me put it.
She does get a little anxious. And she used to ask me for previews, and I never have given her one. Because what she'll do is she'll give me feedback and it'll rattle my case to the point where I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. And I'm done by the time I'm ready to give feedback. When you write 45 sermons a year, plus weddings and funerals and all these other opportunities to speak publicly, whenever you finish one, you're ready to put it to bed.
That's right.
You don't want to revisit it because you know you got to wake up the next day and start another one.
Yeah. Well, she takes it in stride.
She does take it in stride. So anyway, yeah, but I think that 1 Corinthians 13, we read it at weddings. In fact, I officiated a wedding Saturday night, and it's very sentimental, and it's beautiful. It's wonderfully written, but it does have some pretty direct counsel in there as well.
It does. And I know we're all used to the love is patient, love is kind. So I like that we're starting a few verses ahead and really getting the feel for this. And can you take us into the background, just a little bit about Paul?
Okay.
He's converted on the road to Damascus. Right. He's never met Jesus in real life, but by the Holy Spirit and through kind of this conversion.
He had a kind of spiritual encounter with him, but he was not he's never met him physically, right? And he's a persecutor of the church. And so he's emblematic of the dramatic change that an experience with God can have on a person. I mean, of all the people, it's just so interesting to me that God chooses such unlikely people often to do his work. And Paul would be a great example of that. He's persecuting the church. The first martyr in the book of Acts is Stephen. He's stoned to death. And Peter is literally like holding the cloak. Right. The dad that's throwing the rock.
It's crazy.
And so you've got this guy who just despises the church. He's zealous in his opposition to the church. And now he is fully immersed in the church. And you can imagine how difficult it must have been for the other apostles to accept him because, my goodness, is he like a mole in here who's going to, find out our strategy and he's going to do further damage to the church?
Right. Kind of like accepting the tax collector, right?
Matthew. And Peter, he has kind of a rough background. And then you look at Mary Magdalene and,
right,
her reputation. And then she becomes this fully engaged follower of Christ. And it gives me hope that even someone like me, like the writer of the hymn Amazing Grace, saved a wretch like me.
Yeah.
I once was lost and now I'm found out.
So Paul's an apostle. Why is he an apostle and not a disciple? Are those the same thing?
They're different. All the apostles are disciples. So you're a disciple. I'm a disciple. The apostles were a uniquely selected group of believers in the days of the early church to essentially carry the gospel in a way that the rank and file disciples were not yet prepared to do. So they were people who had much more of a first hand experience with Jesus Christ.
And so it was kind of 12 plus 1, the 1 being Paul, is that
Well,
right?
there was 12 and then Judas betrays Christ. Judas takes his own life. And then the other apostles, they want to fill that role with another person. And so they literally cast lots and it landed on a guy named Matthias and he became the 12th
Okay.
apostle. And so Paul was accepted into the apostolic kind of circle, but he had to be accepted by the other apostles. So again, it was sort of like a supercharged disciple, if I can use that language.
Yeah. No, I like that. That's a good way to think about
So
it.
that's who he is, and he's writing to the church in Corinth. And as I mentioned yesterday, and for those of you who are listening, if you remember the sermon, the church in Corinth was, first of all, it's a really affluent place, very cosmopolitan, and they had some issues in the church. They had some issues with some kind of immorality. They also had issues with just basically competition between people in the church saying, well, my gifts are superior to your gifts. And speaking in tongues became one of those kind of hot button issues. I mentioned in my message yesterday that I went to a worship service where they were speaking in tongues.
No, but I wanted to ask you about
Okay.
that because I feel like, I usually sit in the back so I can watch our congregation how they're reacting if they need anything.
Yep.
But definitely, whenever someone mentions speaking in tongues, you can just see people, you can see their shoulders raise a little, you can see some heads turn. So tell me a little bit more about that.
I can't believe I didn't share this in the message yesterday. Every once in a while, because I don't read from a manuscript, I just read things out. Speaking in tongues is essentially when by the power of the Holy Spirit, someone is given a unique language to speak in or to sing in or to pray in that is unintelligible to anyone in the room that has to be interpreted. And it's sort of almost between that person and God. And then ideally, someone in the room is going to interpret that. Hey, this is what's being said here in this song or in this prayer or just in this uh, speech. When I was in college, I was living out in Estill County and some guys came to do some work at the camp where I was, and they invited the other person who was working there and me to come to a worship service. And so we said we'd do that, and we arranged for transportation to get there. And so we got to the worship service. Very remote, rural, kind of isolated congregation. Wonderful folks, warm and gracious, and so glad to see us. I can't remember if it was in Estill County or Powell County or Lee County, somewhere in Eastern Kentucky. And they were speaking in tongues. And I've never seen that before. And it felt chaotic to me because I come from a Presbyterian background, but everyone seemed to really appreciate it and benefit from it. And I was having a good experience until they pulled out the suitcase with the snakes.
Oh my.
And then the old Barkley was out the door.
You're out the
They
door.
pulled one snake out. I don't know if they pulled any more out because I didn't stick around to see.
Oh, goodness.
But it was interesting. Just, it's a big family tree in the Christian faith. And so we're all, these different things that we emphasize and different expressions in worship. So speaking in tongues was just one of those. But in the early church, it became kind of divisive.
Right. And I was going to say, I think that's how we view it today. And I see a lot of skeptical faces, but it is in the Bible.
It is in the Bible. And I talk with people who have had that experience who it's been very meaningful for. And again, if it's a gift of the Spirit, a gift is something that we receive, that we don't earn or go get. And so I just had never received that gift. So I don't have any negative feeling about that at all. I remember there was a time in our history in this country, in my lifetime, when there was sort of a charismatic movement that blew through the mainline churches. And speaking in tongues was a feature of that. And there was some consternation among church leaders that this was happening. But again, Paul's dealing with that. And so that's why it begins, I think, 1 Corinthians 13 with the notion of speaking in tongues. And if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, and of course it was with the angels have their own little language, but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. So he's just saying, hey, you're speaking in tongues, but your heart is not filled with love. Then you're just like making noise. And so again, he is prompting them to think these gifts mean little to nothing if I don't have the love of God in me.
Right, and you explained to us that the Corinthians really valued these
Mhm.
spiritual gifts, so, Paul is kind of trying to steer them from that maybe and make them a little more humble and say, "But are you doing it for the right reasons?" Or
Yes. And that's what we read in chapter 14, where he talks about the difference between prophecy and speaking in tongues. And he's like, when we prophesy, we're edifying people and building up the church, and speaking in tongues tends to only benefit, or in that context, the one who is doing it.
right. And you brought us, into a story about baby Brittany, and I don't wanna go too far into it because I want people to listen to this
Sure.
sermon, but you got choked up at that story.
I did. My parents were in church, and I tend to get choked up when they're around. They're 93 and 90. And again, I'm not a robot up there. I am so connected with the congregation. It's not like I'm giving a speech or performing a dramatic reading that I can kind of close them off. And so my mom and dad were there. But it also was just instructive to me that my 16-year-old self, who was really afraid to even touch baby Brittany,
Mm.
because just the way she looked, she just didn't look like other babies I had seen. And when her mom said, "Isn't she beautiful?" It was almost like the veil dropped from my eyes and I saw her in a totally different way. And what I wanted to say yesterday was, I believe that's the way that God sees you and me.
Mm.
That, if all of our deformities in terms of our brokenness and our sinfulness, and somehow God looks at people like us and says, "Isn't she beautiful? Isn't he beautiful?" And so I just had all those emotions going through me.
And of course, it was Mother's Day.
Yeah.
A great thing your mom did for that
She did.
family, so
Once a week, kept that baby, and that baby needed constant care.
yeah, I bet it needed the care of a nurse too, so but we move on and you brought up the metaphor of an empty wagon rolling down a hill, kind of the clanging that Paul is talking about if you're doing things without love. We went into the 4 different types of love, which again, I hope people go back and listen. It's really great. And you brought up Simon and Jesus. And Simon was kind of grappling with the idea of agape versus philia.
It's one of those stories where I think many of us who are probably in this conversation right now are listening. Remember that after the resurrection, he appears to his disciples in John chapter 21, and he's basically cooking them breakfast. And he has this interaction with Peter. And of course, Simon Peter had been sort of estranged from the other disciples because he had denied even knowing Jesus. You can imagine they had basically cashed in everything, and in their minds, it was all gone. And so he's having this conversation and he just says, "Peter, do you love me?" And he uses the word agape. And Peter says, "I love you, but I love you in a philia or a phileo sense of the word. I love you like a friend. You're my brother." And Jesus has something else in mind. So 3 times he asks him. There are some who connect that with the 3 times that Peter denied knowing Jesus.
I do. Yeah, personally.
And I do too. So he denies knowing him 3 times, and so there's just that reinforcement of, hey, you're still on the team here. But I find it interesting that John recalls they're both talking about different types of love. And what's powerful for me is to think that after Peter received the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts, which we'll talk about at Pentecost, he now has this kind of love for people. He's healing people. He is risking his own life to take care of people when previously he's saying, "I don't even know Jesus Christ," because he's afraid of what's going to happen to him. So there's something about that indwelling of the Spirit that gives him the ability to love someone in an agape way. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that out. And I had several people say, "Hey, I'd never heard that before."
You go on to say, and I think this is something we value so much today, intellect and insight. Still, if you don't have love, they're nothing.
Absolutely not. And again, yeah, we think that our faith is not necessarily about knowing, it's about trusting. And if you think about in the biblical narrative, there are stories where demons know who Jesus Christ is, and yet they oppose him. They don't have faith in him, but they know. I mean, they're in this guy, and they're like, "Hey, what do you got? What do you want with us?" They're saying to Jesus, they know him, and so knowledge is important, and it's a part of our spiritual life. But knowledge in and of itself is no substitute for trusting in God. And so what he's saying is, hey, you guys, you think you got all this knowledge? I'm telling you, if you don't have this love, your knowledge, you gain nothing or you profit nothing.
Yeah.
Hard to hear. because we do tend to not, I hate to say pride ourselves, but we just like to know
Yeah, I mean,
knowledge.
I think I would go that far. I think we try to attain the highest forms of education we can now. I mean, degree collecting is a thing.
Is it really?
I mean, I feel like it was for me at some points,
I got mine. I was like, fancy looking so.
but it doesn't matter what we're really standing for. And what I and this has taken me so many years to get there and I'm still so imperfect at it, but what I tell my child is, "Yeah, you're smart. Great. But it's so much harder to be kind, isn't it? When you think about it in the day to day, I mean, I struggle with that every day.
You know, isn't it? I found it over the years so deflating whenever you had this image of someone who seems to be this wonderful person, and then you find out behind the scenes they're kind of mean and nasty. And you see that in the world of Christian leadership, pastors or leaders or great Christian musicians who really don't like folks like you would expect. And I go to meetings where I kind of see behind the scenes and I'm always kind of checking myself like, hey, am I sincere? Am I humble? Yeah. And that was a thing all the way back in the early church.
Yeah, and I think kindness just takes so much more patience. Like, intellectual pursuit, it's something you can do together, but really your own thing. But with kindness, woof, you got to talk to people, you have to relate to people. It's just work.
Every day would be perfect if not for people. Yeah. And so, yeah, we never, you're, but well, he says, love is patient, love is kind.
Yes.
I mean, in that extreme, he leads with patience. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but I find that so interesting because patience is not something I have a lot of.
It's one of the hardest things to
It
have.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you went into a story about kind of that patience and that love and that kindness. Can you tell me a little bit of the Speedway gas
It's
station?
one of those, and everybody, we're all the same. We all have things that we regret. And, I would love a do over. I have certain moments in my life that I would love a do over. There's an open door or a closed door, and I just misinterpret that. That's sort of in the story of my life. I can look back and think, man, I just really blown a few things. And that was one of those days. And I don't know what was going on. I think that he looked like someone who maybe was like a recent college graduate or a college student and who had just sort of kind of checked out.
Yeah.
And he's just going through the trash at that Speedway gas station. I mean, I can tell you the exact pump where I can tell you what I was wearing. I mean, I remember it so vividly. And for some reason, and this is something, a flaw in me, it made me angry more than compassionate. And I can't tell you why that was, but I just wasn't in touch with why I felt that way. And so, yeah, I just snatched the donut out of his hand, threw it in the trash, gave him the bag, and drove off. And if I could go back,
Well, that was my question at the beginning before we started this podcast. I said, I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm not going to give you a preview.
okay,
What would you have done differently?
thank you. You know, first of all, I would have introduced myself. My name's Shawn. What's yours? I would ask him, hey, tell me what's going on. I mean, I noticed that you're eating out of the trash can. Is there something? Are you struggling with something? And just listen to him, let him tell his story, dignify him, sit there, look him in the eye, and realize our common humanity, realize he's somebody's son. I've got a son about his age. All those things just to dignify him, help maintain his esteem. Instead, I belittled him. Jesus, who was perfect, never did that. And then you got some goofy, imperfect person doing that. It's sort of like the parable in the Bible where the ruler basically forgives this guy this debt. The guy owes the king a bunch of money, and the king's like, okay, I'm going to be patient with you. And then someone owes that person who owed them money. And that guy shows no grace whatsoever to the one who owes him a lot less. That's just one of those moments where I just have kind of prayed myself through it, just like, God, please forgive me and don't let me do that again. So that's what I would have done.
And AJ just shared a podcast with me. It's based on the book When Helping Hurts by, I think, Brian Fickert and Steve Corbett.
Mhm.
But it addresses a little bit of that in the podcast. It says, a lot of times we hand someone maybe a resource they need or food or clothing, but we forget to dignify them.
Yeah.
I'm forever plugging our school mission work, but I think that's a great thing we get to do at Mill Creek is we get to talk to the kids while we're working with them, and that's just such a blessing.
You can connect as common children of God, common humanity. I can't imagine what it must feel like to have never had a lot of opportunity in my life, never had a whole lot of resources, whether it be people in my life or financial resources. And then to have somebody come in and sort of shower me with these things in a way that makes me feel even worse about myself. I have a creed that I live by, and one of the things in the creed says you never make the poor person conscious of his poverty. And I made that guy that day conscious of look at me and my nice car and look at you. Boom, here's your food. I'm not even gonna look at you. Horrible.
Well, but I think we all do. I mean, the author in this podcast discusses how at one point there was a woman who needed antibiotics and he did the easy thing. He just went and grabbed them. They were 10 cents. And he said, I really should have delved into the community to establish a relationship for her there so she would have continuing care. And it would be more about her as a person than just fixing the problem that's right in your face. And I've heard also from therapists, there's this great imagery. It's hard to see the nail on the wall and not hammer it in. But that's what you have to do. It's, you have to see the things around the obvious problem, not just
I love that.
it's right there.
It's hard to see the nail in the wall and not hammer it in. Yeah, it is. Well, we used to do Operation Christmas Child, which was sending small trinkets and toys to children in remote places. And one of the questions that we had to ask was, are these little gifts that we're getting putting someone out of business who would manufacture something similar in that village or provide something similar in that village? Again, when helping hurts.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's all I've got for this first sermon on 1 Corinthians 13.
Yeah. I'm
Here-
excited for where we go because it's just such a great passage and so much to learn.
I might do the negative about love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude or irritable or resentful.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
that's a
Is it something easy to
tall
preach
order.
our patience and kindness because we get that? But I mean, how many of us struggle with being irritable? I'm looking at that right now.
Yeah, that's the word that caught me.
Irritable. Maybe I'll think about that. So anyway, thanks for helping me with this podcast.
Yeah,
Thanks to all of you who listened, and we will be back next week. You have a wonderful week. You take good care. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Tuesday Huddle. If Sunday's message encouraged you, we invite you to watch the full service or explore more at walnuthillchurchky.org. Join us this week and next Sunday as we continue to grow together in faith.